Avery Langston was 13 when she solved an equation no adult ever could live, on national TV. But just as she lifted the chalk, the broadcast cut to black. The cameras were pulled, her name erased, and within hours she was accused of hacking her own mind. They called her a fraud. They called her dangerous. But Avery left behind one line of code. No one could decrypt until now. And what it reveals might destroy everything they tried to hide. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Elridge, North Carolina was the kind of town where history clung to brick walls like dust, never cleaned, only rearranged. The middle school sat at the edge of town, red-bricked, neatly trimmed bushes, a flagpole that seemed to stand taller than the school itself, as if patriotism mattered more than the students inside. The hallways smelled of floor wax and old textbooks, and every classroom felt like a place where futures were silently decided without ever being spoken aloud. In room 214, the quiet rhythm of chalk against the board punctuated the morning silence. Mrs. Holland stood at the front, her posture stiff, glasses hanging from a chain. She wrote equations with the urgency of someone who believed math wasn't meant to be understood, only survived. Behind her, rows of students sat scribbling notes, some pretending to follow, others not trying at all. And in the very last row sat Avery Langston, 12 years old, small in frame but sharp in mind. She didn't tap her pencil or stare out the window. She focused. Every word, every number, she took them in like she was taking air into her lungs. But no one noticed. They rarely did. When Mrs. Holland asked a question, hands shot up, mostly from the same students, mostly from those who'd been assured their whole lives that they belonged in the front row, center of attention, center of belief. Avery raised her hand too. Quiet, steady, controlled. Mrs. Holland frowned slightly at the sight of it. "Let's hear from Dylan," she said, eyes gliding past Avery like she was a shadow against the wall. Dylan, 2 rows up, shrugged. I don't know. Is it 4? It's 6, Mrs. Holland corrected, her voice clipped. Then, with a sigh that carried irritation, "Anyone else?" Avery spoke anyway, not loudly, just enough. "The correct answer is -6, because when you isolate the variable," Avery Mrs. Holland cut in, turning her head just barely. "That's not what I asked." Then with a strained smile that wasn't really a smile, "Let's try to stay on level, okay?" A few students snickered. Avery lowered her hand. Her notebook stayed open, filled not with the slow, safe equations from the board, but advanced work factorization, polynomials, unfinished numbers that spiraled in her head like constellations. She didn't need anyone to approve it. But she wanted someone to see it, to see her. Later that day, as students rushed out for lunch, Avery stayed behind. "Mrs. Holland?" she asked, waiting for acknowledgement that did not immediately come. "Yes?" Her tone was curt, already impatient. "I finished the packet you gave me last week. I was wondering if there was a more advanced—" "You're doing fine where you are," the teacher replied, turning away. "Let's focus on mastering the basics first." "But I already—" "Avery," she said again, firmer this time, "not everyone learns at the same pace. It's nothing to be upset about." "I'm not upset," Avery said quietly. "I just want a challenge." Mrs. Holland's jaw tightened. "You know," she said, voice lowering into something false and condescending, "there's no shame in staying in your lane. Some students have a natural math ability, and some," she paused, choosing the next words like they were made of glass, "some do better with extra support." Avery heard what wasn't said. She always heard it. She slipped her notebook into her bag without another word. In the hallway she heard 2 boys laughing. Not loudly, just enough that it felt intentional. "Did you see her trying to answer again?" one whispered. "Yeah. She thinks she's smart. My brother says black girls don't do math anyway." They walked past her without looking at her. Bias didn't need eyes. It lived in the air. Avery didn't cry. She didn't slow down. But the words lingered, caught in her ribs like hooks. At home, the Langston house was small but warm. Her mother, Deirdre, worked 2 jobs, one at the local grocery store, one cleaning offices at night. Her voice was tired but always gentle. Her hands, always moving, always doing, cooking, folding, checking homework, reaching for the hope that tomorrow might be easier. "How was school?" she asked that evening, slicing tomatoes, back turned. "Fine," Avery said. "You eat lunch?" "Yeah." You finished that math packet already? Avery hesitated, then nodded. Last week. Deirdre turned then, brows lifted. And she didn't give you something new? She said, I should stay on level. The cutting board fell silent. Deirdre didn't respond. Not right away. Instead, she walked over, put a hand on her daughter's shoulder, and looked at her, not with worry, but with recognition. You know what level you're on, she said softly. Don't ever let them tell you small just because they can't see big. Avery nodded, but a weight was growing inside her. A slow question pressing itself forward. What if they never let her prove it? That night, long after her mother went to bed, Avery sat at the kitchen table. A single bulb flickered overhead. Her notebook lay open again, but not for homework. She was drawing equations, not the kind they gave in class. Far beyond it, numbers flowed from her pencil like they had somewhere to go, somewhere that wasn't this place. She flipped to a fresh page. The school district website was open on her laptop. She'd found something earlier, something she kept thinking about. An advanced placement exam. It wasn't offered at her school, only at 2 others in the county. It was meant for 9th graders. High-level algebra, logic sequencing, predictive modeling. It was everything she wanted, but the registration required teacher recommendation. She stared at the blinking cursor. She typed her initials. A. Then she stopped. She deleted it. Instead, she typed a different name, one no one could trace. Alex Lane. She entered her address, then changed the zip code to match the school offering the test. She filled out every field, carefully, precisely. The submission page loaded. She didn't hesitate. She clicked submit. For 2 slow seconds, nothing happened. The website churned. The screen flickered. Then, confirmation. Her heart raced. She leaned back in the chair, exhaling as though she'd just stepped through a locked door. For the first time, she could feel something shifting, like air before a storm, like the moment lightning decides where to strike. But she wasn't naive. She knew what this meant. If she failed, she'd prove them right. If she succeeded, they might not forgive her for it. She closed her notebook. Just then, her laptop screen flashed with a final message, one she hadn't seen before. Your test will be hand-reviewed due to score anomalies. Identity will be verified. Her breath caught. Hand-reviewed. Score anomalies. Identity verified. They were already looking. And the name wasn't Avery Langston. It was Alex Lane. She closed the laptop slowly, pulse pounding in her ears. Because now she knew, if she passed, someone was going to start asking questions. And if they did, they would learn the truth. But not yet. Not before she proved what she already knew. She wasn't just good at math. She was extraordinary. One night later, Avery opened her email and saw that the school district had flagged her test, demanding an emergency meeting with the mystery student who shattered every record. It started with a red flag, one the school district's software had never seen before. In the central office of Elridge County Public Schools, a high-security algorithm ran every test submission through layers of fraud detection, performance thresholds, and identity confirmation. It was designed to catch mistakes, detect plagiarism, and identify outliers. But the test submitted under the alias Alex L. didn't just raise a flag, it broke the system. The score was mathematically perfect, strategically elegant. The student hadn't just answered correctly. They had moved through complex problem-solving steps with such precision that the software couldn't categorize the result. The exam surpassed every recorded district benchmark, shattering statistical ceilings long thought untouchable. The algorithm flagged it, not for errors, but because it simply didn't believe it was humanly possible. Within 48 hours, the top layers of the district's administration were in a state of quiet panic. The head of gifted programs, the assistant superintendent, and even the district's legal counsel were pulled into a closed-door emergency session. Tension clung to the walls like fog. "Who is this Alex L?" asked Superintendent Craig Delmont, scanning the printout as though it personally insulted him. "No enrollment record," Miss Chandler from Testing Services replied, eyes glued to her screen. But the address listed traces to the Oak Ridge Apartments, South Elridge. The room fell into a charged silence. South Elridge, a neighborhood long known for being overlooked and underfunded. The kind of place that got mentioned in district meetings only when suspensions or budget cuts were discussed. The idea that a prodigy could come from there. Unthinkable. "So," Delmont muttered, "either it's a prank, a stolen identity, or someone rigged the test."
Miss Chandler shook her head.
"It's not rigged," I reviewed the scratch work. It's not just perfect. It's brilliant. Back in South Elridge, Avery Langston sat cross-legged in her bedroom, the soft hum of her laptop filling the room. Her test result, now confirmed and flagged, was already printed out in her notebook. To her, it wasn't just a score, it was evidence that the walls they'd built around her intelligence weren't real. But instead of feeling triumphant, her stomach twisted with fear. At 10:12 p.m., the email arrived. Alex L., your submission has triggered district review. Please respond to verify your identity within 48 hours. Avery's heart froze. She knew what this meant. She couldn't verify anything. She wasn't Alex L., not in any official system. She'd used a made-up alias, changed her zip code, rerouted everything through a loophole. But part of her wanted them to know, not for glory, but because the truth mattered. At school the next day, whispers moved like static in the hallways. I heard someone hacked the math exam. No, it was some genius from a private school, probably Monroe Prep. Whoever it is, it ain't anyone from here. In room 214, Mrs. Holland seemed nervous. She didn't make eye contact with Avery, didn't call on her. The same woman who used to dismiss her now avoided her entirely. For the first time, silence in the classroom didn't feel like invisibility. It felt like fear. Meanwhile, at the district office, another emergency meeting unfolded. This is a PR nightmare waiting to happen, said one board member. We've got journalists calling, asking who this mystery student is. What's our message? Dilmont leaned forward. Simple. We bring them into the light. If this student is real, if they belong to our district, let's find them. Publicly. By that evening, a district-wide announcement went live. To honor the mystery student, who achieved a historic score on the advanced placement entrance exam, we are hosting a televised regional math competition. All students are welcome to compete. Let the genius step forward. It looked like celebration, but it felt like bait. Avery read the announcement on her laptop, eyes scanning each word like they were traps. A televised event? Cameras? Lights? Public scrutiny? But something deep in her stirred. Beneath the fear, there was a voice. A voice louder than Mrs. Holland's dismissals, louder than the snickers from classmates, louder than doubt itself. They wanted to find the genius. Then let them. The next morning, she stood outside the guidance counselor's office, staring at the sign-up sheet for the competition. Her reflection in the glass door looked smaller than she felt. But her jaw was set, her eyes steady. Inside, Mr. Keller looked up in surprise. Avery, what can I help you with? I want to enter the math competition, she said, placing the form on his desk. There was a beat of awkward silence. Are you sure? It's designed for top students from accelerated tracks. I'm sure. He hesitated, pen in hand. I just want to manage expectations. If you don't make it past the first round, it might be disappointing. I'll manage, she said firmly. He signed. As she stepped out, she passed a group of students near the stairwell. One of them, Kellen Reese, looked at her with a smirk. You? Seriously? He muttered. Avery didn't blink. That evening, the school issued a lukewarm announcement. We are proud, if somewhat surprised, to announce Avery Langston will represent Elridge Middle School in the upcoming regional math competition. Pride, if somewhat. Support from the staff was barely there. Students laughed behind her back. Mrs. Holland remained completely silent. But Avery had made her decision. She began training alone, solving equations under dim light, writing formulas until her wrists ached. Her kitchen table became a war zone. The only thing louder than her pencil was her breath. While she trained, the internet caught fire. Forums speculated that Alex L. was a college student in disguise. Others believed it was a PR stunt. No one guessed it was a 12-year-old black girl who studied in silence while her mother worked night shifts to make rent. 2 days before the competition, the district released a dramatic promo video. Drone shots of wealthy students in tailored uniforms, interview clips from private school coaches, a classical soundtrack building suspense. And finally, but one name remains a mystery. Avery watched from her room, unfazed. This wasn't about the camera. This was about the lie they'd built around her for years, that she didn't belong, that she wasn't capable, that math had no space for her mind. She didn't need their spotlight. She was the spotlight. On the morning of the competition, Avery stepped onto the auditorium stage, only to realize she was the only black student among the finalists, and the judges' expressions had already decided who didn't belong. The posters were everywhere, on school bulletin boards, on coffee shop windows, pinned to library doors and street poles. Bright colors, bold letters, all screaming the same thing. The Elridge Genius Hunt, live broadcast. Beneath it, a cryptic line teased the audience. A mystery mine, a record-breaking score. Who is the genius behind the math? Avery Langston walked past one of those posters on her way to class, hood drawn slightly over her head. She didn't stop to read it. She didn't have to. She already knew. In room 2114, her usual back row seat felt smaller, tighter. The air in the classroom buzzed, not with excitement, but mockery. "I bet it's some Harvard kid faking it for attention," one boy whispered. "Maybe it's AI," another joked. "Like some robot wrote the test."
"No way, it's someone from around here,"
a girl said, flicking her hair and laughing. "This town doesn't make geniuses." The words stabbed softly, not loud enough to break skin, but sharp enough to bleed. Avery sat silent, hands folded on her desk, eyes fixed on her notebook. She wasn't hiding because of fear. She was hiding because the noise around her didn't deserve the truth. She was the genius, the one they mocked, speculated about, and erased from every possibility. On television, the story had taken a life of its own. Local news anchors spoke about the mysterious math mind like it was an urban legend. Sources say the student achieved a perfect score on a level 3 algorithmic diagnostic designed for collegiate-bound youth, one reporter announced. Speculation swirls around Monroe Prep, Crestline Academy, and other elite schools in the region. The camera then cut to interviews with polished students from wealthy districts. A boy in a pressed blazer, smiling confidently. "It's probably someone with a private tutor, or someone who's been prepped since kindergarten." Not once did the media show Elridge Middle School. Certainly not the South Elridge neighborhood. Definitely not Avery Langston. Even on social media, the assumptions echoed the same bias. Hashtags like Math Mystery Kid and Genius Watch trended. But beneath the posts were images of white teens in varsity jackets, kids with expensive glasses, and fancy calculators. No one posted a black girl's face. No one even imagined her. Avery sat in her room at night, headphones in, watching clips of the upcoming show on her cracked laptop screen. The promo video was slick and cinematic. Slow pans of young hopefuls solving equations. Slow-motion clips of judges at their tables. Music that pulsed with suspense. Then came the voiceover. "Whoever you are, the world is watching. Come forward. Claim your title." Her heart raced. She hadn't told anyone. Not her classmates. Not her mother. Not even Mr. Keller. Only she knew what was coming. Her name wasn't on the roster. But something inside her told her that if she kept quiet, they'd replace her narrative with someone else's. They'd assign her brilliance to a face that matched their expectation. And she would disappear again, this time buried under applause she never got to earn. The night before the live show, Avery barely slept. Numbers floated in her mind, like constellations, patterns, logic, sequences, everything that gave her peace. But tonight, they weren't peaceful. They were few. Morning came, cold and clear. The Elridge County Civic Center glowed with floodlights. Students from every competing school filed in, wearing tailored blazers, fresh haircuts, polished shoes. They held folders, notepads, even personalized calculators engraved with their names. Avery wore jeans and her church shoes. As she walked through the side entrance, unnoticed, a production assistant handed her a contestant badge. She clipped it onto her jacket. It read only one thing. 17. Backstage. Murmurs filled the air. "Did you see Monroe Prep's kid? That girl's been to 3 nationals already." Crestline brought in a tutor from MIT. "Wonder if the mystery kid will even show." No one looked at Avery. She sat in the corner studying the sample questions one last time. Her fingers moved with quiet certainty, her pencil tapping like a metronome. She didn't need their spotlight. She just needed the problem. In the control room, producers buzzed around, checking cameras, lighting, audio feeds. The host, Blake Marison, flipped through his cue cards, practicing his lines. "Tonight we crown the mind behind the mystery. Is it brilliance or luck? Talent or fraud?" The director nodded. "Keep it dramatic, but don't mention the score too much. People might think it's a hoax." Blake grinned. "Let's give them a face they can clap for." The broadcast began at 7. Lights dimmed. A roar of applause surged as Blake stepped onto the stage. "Good evening, North Carolina," he boomed. Tonight, one of these brilliant minds will walk away, not just with a trophy, but with the title of the Elridge Genius. The screen behind him flashed with the faces of the competitors, each shown in profile, with dramatic lighting, upbeat music, and a flash of their school name. Avery's photo appeared last. No name, just 7 sin. No school listed. No music. Just silence. The audience murmured. Social media lit up instantly. Who's 17? Is that the mystery genius? Why no school name? Avery, sitting on the far left stool, didn't react. She kept her hands in her lap, face composed, mind razor sharp. The first round began. Basic mental math under a time limit. Contestants answered buzz-in questions in lightning rounds. Avery didn't buzz first. She buzzed last, but her answers were flawless. Crisp. Swift. No hesitation. The judges began to glance at each other. In the second round pattern recognition, the questions became brutal. Sequences from ancient logic problems, number theory riddles, data models. Students began missing. Some froze. One even buzzed out with a wrong answer and sat in embarrassed silence. Avery didn't miss one. In the production booth, Blake Marison leaned into his mic, trying to keep the show's tension alive. Contestant and 17 is quite consistent. We still don't know where they're from, but clearly this kid didn't come to play. The online chat was exploding. Miss 17 is the GOAT. No way that's a middle schooler. Could it be a college student in disguise? Still, no one considered she might be black. When the final round was announced, one unsolvable question from the district archives, the room fell into reverent silence. It was the problem that had stumped teachers, college students, and even AI software. One by one, the contestants attempted it. Crestline's prodigy folded her arms after 10 minutes. Monroe Prep's genius erased his board in frustration. And then it was Avery's turn. She stood, took a breath, and walked to the board with the calm of someone who wasn't guessing, but knew. Each line she wrote built on the last, her chalk creating architecture from logic. The room slowly grew silent. Not a single breath from the audience. Even the camera crew stopped moving. Avery's hands moved like they were transcribing something already completed in her head. She wasn't trying to solve it. She already had. 15 minutes later, she stepped back. Blake Marison stared at the board. The judges leaned forward. Then utter silence. The lead judge stood up, eyes wide. This is correct. This problem has never been solved before. The audience gasped. Twitter exploded. Teachers watching from home dropped their drinks. And then Blake Marison turned to the camera with forced enthusiasm, clearly scrambling. Well, folks, I guess the genius has come forward. He looked down at his cue card and blinked. His voice shook slightly. Contestant N17 is Avery Langston from Elridge Middle School. And just as the crowd gasped in disbelief, the broadcast was mysteriously cut, screen flickering to black before Avery could even step forward. The glare of the stage lights was blinding. They weren't made for someone like Avery Langston. She stood at the edge of the platform, heart pounding, breath shallow beneath her too large blazer. A faded navy piece her mother borrowed from the woman upstairs who worked front desk at the hospital. Her hair was braided neatly, pulled back into a bun that felt too tight for how exposed she suddenly felt. The stage was set with theatrical precision. Velvet curtains, shimmering lights, 3 elevated judge panels, and 4 camera angles streaming live to thousands of viewers across the region. This was no longer a local math contest. It had become a primetime event, and every step Avery took toward the center was a quiet rebellion. The moment she emerged from the side curtain, a ripple passed through the auditorium. Not applause, not cheers, gasps. One by one, necks turned. Parents, students, producers, even the other contestants leaned forward. No one said it aloud, but the thought echoed the same in every seat. She doesn't look like a genius. A black girl, from a public middle school, in borrowed clothes, carrying no clipboard, no graphing calculator, no branded hoodie from some private math academy. Judge Thompson, a retired statistician from Cornell, leaned sideways and whispered, "She's the one?" The younger judge, a regional math director named Dana Sylvie, barely concealed her skepticism. "There's no way this is the same kid who cracked that algorithm." The host, Blake Marison, quickly glanced at the producer off stage, mouthing silently, "Double-check that intro card." Avery heard none of it. She stepped forward slow and deliberate, her shoes clicking against the polished floor like punctuation marks in a sentence only she knew how to finish. The host turned back to the camera, recovering from the interruption with a forced smile. Well, ladies and gentlemen, he said, our final round contestant Avery Langston from Elridge Middle School has already made headlines with her unconventional rise. Let's see if she lives up to the mystery. There was no applause, just silence. Avery stood at her podium. Her hands were steady. The first question came without ceremony. A complex geometry problem designed to trip contestants with embedded misdirections. She solved it in 8 seconds. The buzzer rang. Correct, said Judge Sylvie, her voice tight. The next question was from statistics. It required an understanding of advanced distribution curves, rarely taught before college. Avery adjusted her glasses. Standard deviation of 2.1. She answered. Population mean is 4. Silence. Judge Thompson frowned. That is correct. She moved on. Probability theory. Set manipulation. Multivariable logic. Each time, they tried to trip her, and each time, she moved with calm precision, less like a student, and more like a storm that had been waiting to be unleashed. But something subtle began to change. The harder she excelled, the colder the room became. The host skipped transitions after her answers. The camera panned less frequently to her face. The judge's affirmations grew quieter, flatter. The other contestants, now eliminated, watched with growing discomfort, some whispering among themselves. By round 4, the audience had caught the shift. On social media, the chat erupted with questions. Why is no one clapping for Avery? Why are her questions harder? Anyone else feel like they're trying to break her confidence? Back on stage, Avery felt it too. The change. Not in the questions, but in the tone. Every correct answer was met not with admiration but suspicion. Every glance from the judges felt like a challenge. Judge Sylvie leaned into her mic. Avery, for this next sequence, you're not allowed to use scratch paper. Let's see your mental process. Avery nodded once. No protest. The problem was monstrous. Nested patterns. Prime factorization. Inverse functions layered on top of each other, like a puzzle designed to crack under pressure. She closed her eyes, breathed once, then began solving aloud. First, identify the prime root. Carry the inverse across. Fold it into the exponent. Her voice was calm, rhythmic, like someone reciting a lullaby written in numbers. Final answer. The judges froze. Judge Thompson stared at his answer key, then back at her. That is correct. Still, no smile, no praise. Blake Marison fumbled with his cue cards, clearly scrambling. Well, looks like Avery's full of surprises, but now it's time. He turned toward the camera, voice dropping into something dramatic. For the final round, the unsolvable. A collective hush settled over the room. Even the tech crew paused. The board behind Avery lit up, revealing a question that had existed in the district archives for over 30 years. A riddle wrapped in pure math, untouched, unsolved, nearly abandoned. This equation, Marison said, has stumped professors, teachers, and even computer software. It was designed without a known solution. But if you can crack it, you win. Avery stepped forward. The screen displayed variables, nested within functions, limits wrapped inside logarithms, irrational numbers spun into impossible loops. Her eyes scanned it once, then again, and slowly, her hand moved to the chalk. She began writing. Her movements were slow, methodical. Every line of chalk echoed against the quiet. Judge Sylvie leaned forward, arms crossed. Judge Thompson scratched his temple. Avery kept writing. The equation unfolded line by line, curve by curve. She wasn't copying from a memory or mimicking a method. She was building it, constructing a bridge through chaos using rules only she seemed to understand. The room leaned in. Even the camera crew had stopped adjusting. And then, just as she approached the final line, the screen flickered. At first a stutter, a brief skip. Then the feed cut entirely. Viewers at home saw nothing but static. In the control room, technicians shouted, "We've lost the feed. Server crash? No signals being overridden." Externally, panic swept through the tech booth. The producer grabbed his headset. "Get the backup feed running. Now." But the secondary feed was gone too. And on every TV across North Carolina, thousands of screens that had been tuned into the moment, a young black girl solved the impossible. There was now only darkness. Just the word. Signal interrupted. Backstage, an emergency call was placed from the district office. Shut it down. She wasn't supposed to win. The moment the screen went black, Confusion exploded across homes all over Elridge County. Families watching from their living rooms stared at their televisions in disbelief. Students, who had been live streaming the competition's final round on phones and tablets, sat frozen with fingers hovering above comment sections that had now devolved into digital chaos. Questions flooded every platform. Did the feed just cut? Where's the final answer? Wasn't that girl about to win? Inside the Civic Center, the air was thick with unease. Avery Langston stood alone at the chalkboard, her solution half-written, the conclusion seconds away when everything shut down. She slowly lowered her hand, eyes blinking under the bright stage lights, as murmurs crept through the crowd. The judges looked shaken, whispering among themselves. Blake Marison, the host, clutched his mic and forced a weak chuckle. Looks like we're having a little technical hiccup. Hang tight, folks. But his voice betrayed something else. Panic. Behind the stage, the production crew was in disarray. Technicians scrambled between servers and screens, rebooting equipment that showed no signs of failure. The head tech squinted at the monitors and muttered, "This wasn't a crash. Someone pulled the plug." No one could explain how both the main and backup feeds had been disabled simultaneously. Amid the commotion, a junior assistant picked up a line from an unknown number. A cold voice on the other end simply said, "End it now. She's not the face we want." The broadcast never resumed. 15 minutes of technical difficulties gave way to commercial reruns. The live chat, once filled with excitement, turned toxic with confusion and accusation. And just like that, Avery's moment was stolen. The next morning, Elridge District posted a vague statement on social media. Due to unforeseen technical difficulties, the final moments of the Genius Hunt were not broadcast. We are conducting an internal review of results. Update soon. But that statement wasn't meant to inform, it was meant to stall. Avery didn't go to school the next day, not because she was hiding, but because she wasn't sure what world she'd be walking back into. Her mother, Deirdre, sat with her in silence at the kitchen table, the weight of disbelief still hanging between them. "They're trying to take it from you, aren't they?" Deirdre asked. Avery looked down at her untouched cereal. "They already have." By mid-morning, the media pivoted. The headlines were cautious but loaded. Winner of Genius Hunt unconfirmed. Final results under review. Identity of mystery genius in question. The celebration that should have followed her brilliance turned into suspicion. More troubling were the emerging blog posts that accused her of manipulation. One claimed the student had used unauthorized access to enter the competition. Another suggested she might have received external help, hinting at hacking or academic fraud. The next blow came from a viral article titled, "Was the Genius Hunt Hacked?" The writer, using unnamed sources, implied that a student from Elridge Middle School, with no advanced placement background, had somehow bypassed eligibility standards. Without naming her, they painted Avery as a fraud. Her story began to rot in public opinion before it even had time to bloom. No major network asked for her interview. No official announcement confirmed her win. The silence was strategic. They weren't going to accuse her publicly. They were going to starve her into erasure. At school, the atmosphere was worse than before. Kellen Reese, always quick to mock, said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Genius can't even finish a show." Maybe the power cut itself once it saw her answer. Students laughed. Some just stared. Others whispered as she passed. The teachers remained silent. Mrs. Holland didn't acknowledge her at all. The only thing she received from school was an email. "Due to the sensitive nature of recent events, please refrain from discussing the competition until an official statement is released. Your cooperation is appreciated." It was a warning disguised as professionalism. That night, Avery sat in her room, staring at her notebook. Every page was filled with equations, patterns, notes, proof of the mind they refused to believe she had. Her laptop pinged. A new email appeared. This one from a blocked address. Subject line, "We saw what they did." Inside was a single sentence, "Don't let them rewrite your name. We saved your footage." Attached was a link to a private video. Avery clicked, heart pounding. The clip opened to show her final moments on stage. Filmed from the side, behind a curtain. A backstage crew member had captured the chalkboard. As she wrote, it showed every line of the unsolvable problem being solved, clearly and completely. The final answer, clean, bold, was caught on film. Another message appeared. "They want people to believe you never finished. Show them you did." Avery stared at the screen, stunned. Someone had seen the truth. Someone had saved it. She opened a new account. No alias this time. Just her name. She uploaded the video and typed a caption. They cut the feed. But not the truth. The video went viral within hours. Tens of thousands watched it. Then hundreds of thousands. The comments flooded in. Some praising her. Others calling it a setup. But the footage was undeniable. It showed what the district didn't want the world to see. A black girl solving what no one else could. Then the video disappeared. Her account was suspended for suspicious activity. That same afternoon, a new article dropped. This one from a popular tech blog. Analysis shows possible editing in Genius Girl video. The post included graphs, red-circled images, and expert opinions, but none were sourced. The claim was clear. The video was fake. The takedown was strategic, well-funded, and vicious. No longer satisfied with silence, the district made its next move. A press release from Elridge County Schools read, "We are opening a formal investigation into potential academic dishonesty related to a recent competition. We take integrity seriously and are cooperating fully with educational officials." They weren't just trying to erase Avery. They were trying to discredit her forever. And just as the investigation began, an unexpected email landed in the district inbox from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, demanding to see Avery Langston's test results. The equation she had solved wasn't just difficult, it was considered impossible. A 112-year-old polynomial riddle, originally scribbled in an obscure German mathematics journal, long buried beneath layers of academic dust. Only a few had ever attempted to solve it in recent decades, and all had failed. Graduate students had used software models, professors had argued over its structure at international conferences, and yet the problem remained untouched. Until Avery Langston, a 13-year-old from a forgotten corner of North Carolina, dismantled it on a chalkboard, live in front of an audience that had no idea what they were witnessing. When MIT received her raw equations, their first instinct was skepticism. The math department assembled a small team to review her work, expecting to find errors, shortcuts, or perhaps even misinterpretations. But what they found instead was something so precise, so elegantly constructed, that it halted their assumptions at once. Line by line, step by step, her process revealed a mind not merely replicating known methods, but innovating her own. Her proof was layered with creativity, logic, and a clarity that professors said they hadn't seen in decades. The department's head, Dr. Raymond Thaler, described the experience in an internal memo as a humbling moment in my career. He added, "This isn't the kind of math you teach. This is the kind you witness. What she's done belongs in academic history books." Within a week, MIT published a paper titled, "A Novel Solution to the Fable-Lorentz Polynomial, Youth Submission Verified." It was cautious in its wording, but the mathematical community saw the truth between the lines. The equation was solved, and the solution didn't come from Princeton, Yale, or Cambridge. It came from Elridge. Mathematicians from Tokyo, Berlin, and São Paulo began citing the paper. Renowned journals requested permission to reprint her solution. Several experts even recorded reaction videos walking through her steps, their voices breaking into laughter and awe midway through. They called it elegant, historic, and beyond doctoral level. Forums exploded with discussion. Math professors emailed one another. Who is this girl? And yet, despite the academic shockwaves, the mainstream media remained silent. Major networks didn't mention her name. Talk shows ignored the story. Not a single morning anchor picked up the headline that a black girl from a public school had outsmarted some of the brightest minds in modern history. Some blamed timing, others called it too niche. But those were just excuses. Her race, her age, her zip code, they didn't fit the narrative. This wasn't the face they wanted, beside brilliance. It didn't sell the image of genius they were comfortable marketing. Quietly, gatekeepers of fame turned their backs. Avery noticed. She watched each day as her inbox remained empty of press inquiries, while white contestants from the same math competition appeared on local shows, giving interviews about what it was like to be part of history. None of them had even made it to the final round. Yet they were treated like winners, like stars. She said nothing. But inside it burned. The silence wasn't neutral. It was violent in its own way. To be this extraordinary and still invisible was its own kind of cruelty. Then one day, an email landed in her inbox with a subject line she almost didn't believe was real. Subject, "A Future with Us," from Carson Maddox. Carson Maddox, was a name that commanded attention. A Silicon Valley tech billionaire, founder of the revolutionary AI firm Quantum Logic, and a household name known for philanthropy and disruption in education. His company was responsible for the largest educational tech rollout in the last decade. If MIT represented the academic elite, Maddox represented the future of digital power. His message was brief but striking. Avery, we've been following your story. Your mind is rare. We'd like to offer you a full academic scholarship, mentorship, and a future with quantum logic. You'd have access to any university of your choosing, unlimited resources, and a place in the most innovative tech labs on the planet. Attached was a formal contract. At first, Avery's family was ecstatic. Deirdre cried when she read the words full scholarship. Her father, normally guarded and stern, finally smiled. It felt like validation. Someone important had seen what the world tried to erase. But Avery didn't sign. She read the contract again and again. Buried in fine print was a clause labeled Intellectual Ownership Agreement. It stated that any research, concepts, algorithms, or technological developments created during her time under scholarship, including prior unpublished work, would be the sole property of quantum logic. Avery sat alone that night, staring at that sentence. She flipped through her notebook, the one she had filled with ideas, with half-formed theorems, with thoughts that no one else had seen yet. She realized what the offer truly was, a purchase, not of her potential, but of her genius. If she signed, they would own her mind. The next morning, Maddox's team sent a follow-up message. We understand these decisions take time. We're prepared to sweeten the offer. Our legal team can work with your family directly. Avery didn't reply. Instead, she drafted her own email. It was short. I'm not for sale. I'd rather stay invisible than be owned. She hit send. The media never heard about the offer. Maddox's team went silent. No lawsuit, no acknowledgement, just quiet erasure, as if the offer had never existed. But Avery felt something shift. She had turned down one of the most powerful men in tech. Not out of pride, but out of principle. She knew the world had tried to erase her once. Now it wanted to contain her. But she wouldn't let it. She had solved the impossible, and she had done it without anyone's permission. 2 nights later, a mysterious package arrived at her doorstep. No return address, just a sealed envelope inside, containing blueprints of an unfinished formula and a note. They erased me. Finish what they couldn't. The applause still echoed in Jalen's mind from the live showdown, but Avery's world had just begun to twist beneath her feet. Cameras had shifted their focus to her, the only black girl in a sea of white applause. Avery, a quiet observer in the shadow of Jalen's rise, had once been dismissed, overlooked, and subtly mocked for her quiet obsession with artificial intelligence. But now, that same brilliance drew in something far more dangerous than pure envy. Carson Maddox's name came up the following morning. He was a household figure, a tech messiah in Silicon Valley, who had built an empire around AI and machine learning, selling predictive systems to governments and corporations alike. He appeared on television in a custom suit, gray-streaked hair slicked back, eyes hidden behind polished wireframe glasses. Avery Hale, he said with a rehearsed grin, is the future of technology, and I want to help fund that future. The media erupted. Maddox publicly offered Avery a full scholarship. Any school, anywhere in the world. Ivy League, covered. Oxford, done. Housing, travel, meals, stipends. The announcement was paraded as a philanthropic gesture toward underrepresented genius. The country cheered. Talk shows replayed the clip endlessly. Her parents cried when the call came through. It was the kind of offer that pulled entire families out of generational poverty. But Avery wasn't celebrating. Something about the deal gnawed at her. Not the generosity itself, but the timing, the tone. She'd never applied to Maddox's foundation. She didn't even know she'd been on their radar. How did he know about her unfinished formulas? Some scrawled hastily in the margins of her notebooks, others hidden in folders that had never left her encrypted laptop. The official envelope arrived 3 days later. Velvet-lined, thick parchment, embossed with silver. Her name was written with robotic precision. When she opened the folder, the first page was glowing. Congratulations, Miss Hale. But by page 10, her blood ran cold. There it was, deep in the fine print, a clause buried between benefits and perks. It read, the grantee agrees that any and all future works of intellectual design, inclusive of formulas, systems, code, or related discoveries developed prior to, during, or after the period of sponsorship shall be considered property of Maddox Systems Inc. under Clause 47. Property, not collaboration, not partnership, ownership. It meant her ideas, those algorithms she was still dreaming about, the sequences she hadn't dared speak aloud, would never be hers. They would belong to Maddox, to a man who hadn't built the code, hadn't sat with sleepless nights battling syntax and solving contradictions. He wanted her mind without earning her trust. Her heart thundered. She felt exposed, watched, violated. Her father had already begun planning their move to Boston, telling neighbors about the blessing that had fallen upon them. Her mother kept rewatching the televised announcement, clutching it like a miracle. They believed the world had finally become fair. Avery couldn't bear to tell them yet. Instead, she went silent. She showed up at school, ducking questions, avoiding cameras. In her head, numbers spun faster than ever, but now they stung. The very knowledge she once clung to as her salvation was being commodified. Her brilliance wasn't being celebrated. It was being bought. And then came the gala. It was a high-profile event, broadcast live, with celebrities, tech leaders, and politicians in attendance. Maddox stood at the center, arms open, ready to welcome her to the future. He wore the same smirk he'd worn on TV. Avery walked onto the stage in a navy blue dress, her face expressionless. The audience rose in ovation, thinking this was a coronation. Maddox extended the folder again, holding it out like a holy grail. Cameras zoomed in, reporters leaned forward, and Avery didn't take it. Instead, she turned toward the microphone. Her voice was steady, low, and razor sharp. "I'm not for sale," she said. "Not my ideas, not my future, not my soul." Gasps filled the auditorium. Maddox's smile froze mid-smirk. "I read your contract," she continued, pulling a printed copy from her clutch. "Page 10, Clause 47. You don't want to support me. You want to own me." The audience murmured in confusion. Some clapped. Others stared. Maddox stepped forward, hand raised as if to interrupt. But she didn't let him. "My mind doesn't belong to any firm, and no young black genius should ever have to sign away their legacy to be seen." She dropped the folder on the stage, turned, and walked away, leaving the cameras rolling, and Maddox's empire The news cycle exploded. Some called her brave. Others called her ungrateful. Tech forums split into debates. Hashtags trended. But under the glitz, darker things stirred. Maddox wasn't a man used to hearing no. It started subtly. Opportunities rescinded, invitations retracted. A scheduled campus visit was mysteriously canceled. A summer internship vanished. Her school inbox filled with anonymous threats and concerned notes. "You'll regret this," one message read. "You should have known your place." Avery didn't tell her parents. Not yet. They were still dreaming. She tried to work through it: code, equations, focus. But her devices slowed. Files wouldn't open. One afternoon, her laptop shut down entirely and rebooted to a screen she didn't recognize. Maddox SecureNet. Panic flooded her chest. He'd infiltrated her systems. She called Jalen. He didn't pick up. She reached out to a local mentor, a community college professor who had always encouraged her. When he finally met her in a dim cafe, he looked grave. "Maddox has connections in every tech firm. Avery. He's got eyes in academia, too. You embarrassed him publicly. So what do I do?" she asked, hands trembling. He hesitated, then slid her a small flash drive.
"What's this?"
"Insurance," he whispered. "But it comes with a warning. You've drawn a line, and now he's coming for your mind, your future, maybe." Avery looked down at the flash drive, then at the storm forming outside the window. For the first time, she wasn't just a girl who loved equations. She was a threat. That night, as lightning cracked over her house, Avery's phone buzzed with a new message. "You've made a powerful enemy. We're just getting started." Avery stared at the envelope, as if it might vanish. Thick, official, stamped with the federal seal. U.S. Department of Education, Office for Civil Rights. Her name typed on the front, precise and unmissable. Her fingers hovered above the edge, hesitant to break the seal that might finally break the silence. Her mother opened it with trembling hands. Inside were 4 pages, an official notification of investigation into Elridge County schools. Someone had tipped them off. Anonymously, the letter referenced documented patterns of academic gatekeeping and potential race-based exclusion from advanced placement and gifted programs. and at the center of it, Avery's name. "I didn't do this," Avery said, voice low. Deirdre shook her head. "Maybe someone who watched everything you went through did." But the sense of victory was brief. In fact, it lasted less than 48 hours. Because as soon as the news broke that a federal investigation was underway, Avery's digital presence began to dissolve. First, it was her name on the school district's homepage, gone. Then the MIT publication that had listed her as youth contributor, scrubbed. Within a day, her Wikipedia page, started by a small community of young math bloggers, was flagged for deletion. The reason? Not notable enough. Online it got worse. A well-known education think tank, one that marketed itself as neutral, released a paper titled The Mirage of Genius, The Dangers of Viral STEM Myths. It didn't name her directly, but the opening paragraph included the line, "One recent case of an alleged prodigy exposed how identity politics can cloud academic credibility." People knew exactly who it was about. The timing wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't just about a contest anymore. It had become a campaign. Twitter threads sprouted like weeds, accusing her of being a diversity plant, a woke token, even a deepfake hoax. Someone circulated a conspiracy theory that Avery's viral chalkboard video was actually a CGI render created by an activist group. "No kid writes equations like that," the tweet read. It got over 100 Reddit math forums that had once analyzed her work in admiration, now locked any threads that mentioned her name. One moderator claimed they were being brigaded, and cited a need to maintain the integrity of discussion. She wasn't just being ignored, she was being erased. Even Google began to choke her name. Search results that used to bring up pages of blog posts, interviews, reposted screenshots of her board work, now showed nothing but error pages, spam sites, and reposted opinion articles claiming she was part of a fabricated genius narrative. It wasn't just personal. It was systemic, coordinated, almost algorithmic. Avery sat in the dark that night, her computer casting blue shadows across her face, scrolling through the holes where her presence used to be. She typed her name into the search bar again. This time the first result was a Medium post titled "Genius or PR Stunt: Why We Should Question What the Media Sells Us." She clicked it. In the second paragraph, the author described her as a convenient poster child for racial virtue signaling. She shut the laptop. Avery wasn't just being silenced, she was being undone. The next day, she went to school out of sheer defiance. Her classmates barely looked at her now. A few whispered. Others glanced quickly and looked away. Even the teachers seemed uneasy. Mrs. Holland didn't call on her. Mr. Keller canceled their scheduled guidance meeting, without explanation. One administrator accidentally let slip in the hallway that the school had been told to limit press visibility. There was no press left anyway. They'd all moved on. In gym class, Kellen Reese whispered under his breath as she passed, "Still think you're smarter than everyone?" Avery didn't respond, but the damage sat in her lungs like smoke. That night, she received an email from a journalism student at a university in another state. "I tried to write a piece on you," it began. "But every time I submitted it to a publication, it got killed in edits. Something bigger's going on. Just thought you should know." It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was reality. The same systems that had once failed to recognize her genius were now united in hiding it. And then on a Thursday evening at 3:47 a.m., her inbox pinged. It was a message from a name she didn't recognize. Switch. No subject line. No greeting. Just a single paragraph. "I've been watching what they're doing to you. What they did to me. I have something they can't break. Something they've never been able to solve. I believe you can." Attached was a file, Krypton 92. Avery stared at it. Her fingers hovered. The file wasn't from anyone official. The domain it came from was masked. No metadata, no timestamp. But curiosity was stronger than fear. She downloaded the file. It opened into a custom-coded interface. Black background, green matrix-like lettering. At the center of the screen was a blinking line, and the phrase, "Solve me if you're real." The problem displayed was not mathematical in a traditional sense. It was a code. Layered, recursive, encrypted, unlike anything she had seen in textbooks. It didn't even resemble standardized ciphers or systems. There were mathematical patterns, but buried under irregular logic sequences, letters nested in sequences that resembled DNA code, prime numbers layered beneath ASCII characters. Whoever made it wasn't just protecting data. They were challenging reality. She reached for her notebook instinctively. The first 10 minutes were slow, disorienting. But then something clicked. There was rhythm in the chaos. She began sketching. Hour after hour, the solution started taking shape, not as a complete answer but as a skeleton. A frame, enough to know it wasn't impossible, just protected, and someone out there believed she could break it. This wasn't a math problem, it was a message. Switch messaged again. If you solve this, it unlocks access to a suppressed data archive. Information they've hidden. From people like us. Avery froze. People like us? She typed back. Who are you? No reply. Just a blinking cursor. She returned to the code. Her mind was already shifting gears. She knew this kind of problem was designed not to be solved, but to be felt by a certain kind of mind. Hers. She worked through the night. Lines forming like lightning across the page. She didn't know what was inside the archive. Didn't know if it was real. But she knew one thing now. They could scrub her from the web. They could bury her in bureaucracy. They could rewrite her legacy in footnotes and opinion pieces. But they couldn't stop her from thinking. And they couldn't stop her from being found by those who knew what had been done to minds like hers before. At dawn, a new message appeared on the screen, this time with a single line of decrypted text, buried in 1963, stolen in 1997. Yours in 20. Avery hadn't left her house in 3 days. After the retaliation began, her world narrowed into shadows. Her bedroom became a bunker. Her laptop her last weapon. Her father kept asking if everything was okay. She always smiled and said yes, then turned back toward a screen that now blinked more threats than hope. But somewhere between the algorithms and anxiety, a message arrived. Not a threat this time, just a username, Switch. The message was clean, code signed and embedded with a puzzle, a binary grid that shifted like a Rubik's Cube every 5 seconds. It wasn't meant to intimidate. It was a test. A silent question from someone watching. Avery cracked the shifting pattern in 2 hours, using only a pencil, a legal pad and what was left of her focus. 3 minutes later, the second message came in. I've been waiting for someone like you. That was how she met Switch.
No profile picture, no personal identifiers, just clean code, fragmented syntax, and a relentless mission. Build something the world can't ignore, but do it without being seen.
Switch was what the tech world whispered about, but never proved an encryptionist, X-intelligence, or maybe a rogue collective. No one really knew. But their digital fingerprints had been found across dark web charity networks, whistleblower protection vaults, and compromised billionaire databases. They were more ghost than human. And Switch had been building something big. The project was codenamed Atlas, a decentralized humanitarian algorithm designed to bypass bureaucracy, corruption, and elite manipulation. It would map real-time global need, food, medicine, housing, and then suggest optimized logistical routes using satellite data, climate projections, and underground supply networks. Governments had tried, tech giants had failed. The math was too unpredictable, the ethical frameworks too volatile. But Switch believed Avery could do it. The first file was encrypted so deeply that even opening it crashed her laptop twice. When she finally cracked the gateway, what spilled out wasn't code, it was chaos. Maps layered over real-time temperature grids, disease outbreak models tangled with border control patterns, generative simulations of refugee movement. It wasn't just math, it was madness. And Avery smiled, because madness was exactly where her mind thrived. She worked in silence. No music, no breaks. Just an old desk light, cracked open notebooks, and the feeling that for the first time, someone believed in her, without wanting to own her. Her parents thought she was studying for scholarships, but in truth, she was modeling famine migration across East Africa, and writing encryption protocols strong enough to dodge intelligence agencies. She didn't sleep. For 72 hours, she coded on paper first, recalibrating variables the AI misread, then fed corrected models into a secure local build. Her hands cramped, her back screamed. But her mind never blinked. Every injustice she'd ever felt was a fuse, and now the explosion had purpose. At hour 73, she uploaded her final patch to Switch's darknet drop point. 1 minute later, the server pinged green. 2 minutes later, the first logistics node activated in Chad. 6 hours later, a shipment of drought-resistant grain rerouted, bypassing corrupt checkpoints. By hour 48, a ripple effect had spread across 5 countries. Aid trucks arrived in ghost towns they'd never reached before. Portable clinics popped up in mountains, usually forgotten. A small blog from a Senegalese volunteer posted a photo. children surrounding a truck that shouldn't have been able to find them. The caption read, "Miracle. Logistics miracle." Back in her room, Avery stared at the screen. She had done it. Not for a scholarship, not for applause, but because someone finally saw her not as a pawn, but a partner. Switch messaged again. "You just rewrote what billions failed to imagine. You rewrote humanity's blueprint." Avery's heart pounded, not with pride but with panic, because the message was followed by another. "Now we need to talk about who gets credit." Her stomach dropped. She hadn't thought about it. In the rush of code and equations, she hadn't stopped to consider the politics, the power, the backlash. She wasn't just a girl with a gift anymore. She was a ghostwriter for a global revolution. Switch was kind, but blunt. "You can stay anonymous. Let the world call it Switch's algorithm. You'll be safe, or we reveal you. But once you're seen, you can't go unseen. The system will come for you." The silence that followed that message felt louder than any applause ever could. Avery stood at her window, looking out at the streetlight flickering near the sidewalk. Somewhere beneath that ordinary glow, she had changed the world. But no one knew. She closed her eyes, hearing her parents in the kitchen below still dreaming of Harvard brochures and Maddox scholarships. They had no idea their daughter had just rerouted global hunger lines, while avoiding being digitally assassinated. And yet, she didn't want silence anymore. Not because she wanted fame, but because staying hidden meant letting others erase her brilliance again. She thought about Jalen, about what he lost when he stayed quiet too long, about what he found when he chose to speak. She messaged Switch, "I want credit, but not for me, for every black girl who solved something in silence." The response came slowly, then let the countdown begin. That night, as Avery checked her server logs, she found a breach attempt, traceable directly to the Department of Defense. Avery returned to school beneath a gray sky that mirrored the storm building in her chest. She walked through the halls with her head low, notebooks clutched tight like armor. There were whispers now, new ones, sharper, laced with something heavier than envy. She had been invisible once. Now she was a rumor wrapped in headlines too dangerous to say out loud. Only 2 days had passed since the breach from the Department of Defense pinged her firewall, but the tension had already thickened. She didn't know who was watching, only that someone was. Kellen Reese watched her from his locker. The son of a local councilman and grandson of a retired judge, Kellen had always worn entitlement like a second skin. His essays were praised even when they were plagiarized. His internships guaranteed before applications were opened. But beneath the polished smile and student council speeches was a slow-burning rage. He had watched Avery's rise in quiet disgust. She wasn't loud. She didn't beg for attention. But still, it came to her spotlights she hadn't asked for. Awards she hadn't accepted. Whispers of brilliance that moved through teachers like gospel. But what truly enraged him was that someone like her, black, soft-spoken, unfashionably brilliant, could build something powerful outside the system. That she had done what he, with all his privilege, couldn't even fake. The morning it happened, Avery found her seat surrounded by a strange stillness. No eye contact, no greetings, only phones held just out of reach, eyes darting to the screen, then to her, then away. By third period she knew. The headline blared across a dozen gossip blogs, teen linked to international hacker network, under investigation for cybercrime. Her name wasn't used directly, but the screenshots were hers. A snippet of the humanitarian code, a blurred photo of her notes, and worse, an excerpt from her chat with Switch, taken out of context to imply collusion, not creation. The leak came from an anonymous tip, but Avery didn't need a signature. Kellen had sat behind her in computer science for 3 years. He had seen her writing those equations. He had once asked to borrow her notes, and she had politely refused. That slight, months ago, was all it took. He had copied fragments of her handwritten models and waited for his moment. Now, he had made her a villain. The school called an emergency assembly. Without her, her locker was sealed before lunch. Security officers waited near the counselor's office. Her name was whispered through the halls, not like a secret but like a threat. When Avery's parents were called to the principal's office, her father's hands trembled. Her mother demanded answers, but the school only offered carefully scripted concern. Then came the knock on their front door. 2 plainclothes agents. "We need to ask your daughter some questions regarding her involvement in an ongoing cyber investigation," one said. Avery sat in their living room, under the same ceiling fan she had stared at while solving famine algorithms, now blinking back fear as strangers accused her of working with criminal networks. The interrogation didn't last long, but the damage had begun. Their internet was cut by mistake. Mail started arriving late. Her father's work laptop was flagged by his company's cybersecurity team. They were under surveillance, unofficially, quietly, thoroughly. Avery sat in her room that night, feeling hollowed out. She had tried to save lives, and for that she was being erased. Her phone vibrated once. A secure alert from Switch. You trusted the system. That was the mistake. But we're not done. Attached was a file labeled Clockwork. She opened it slowly. Inside was a full time-stamped backup of her and Switch's chat history, unedited, unfiltered. Every message, every line of code, every ethical debate they had about transparency and justice. It was human, complex, real. And then came the twist. At the bottom of the file location, Switch had traced the leak down to the exact device, IP and user account. Kellen Reese. Not just a name, but a pattern. Switch had hacked into Kellen's backup cloud and found old threads, private group chats with other elite students, mocking affirmative action geniuses, joking about stealing homework from equity kids, and sharing AI-generated essays. One message from Kellen read, "If she wants to be a tech god, she better learn what happens when you piss off a real one." Switch had packaged it all. Proof, receipts, rage in digital form. Avery hesitated. The same system that wanted to crush her now handed her the hammer. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. That night, Switch went public. Not on mainstream news, but on encrypted academic forums, underground networks, and tech watchdog accounts, followed by thousands of respected developers, professors, and human rights organizations. The post was titled, "Who Really Built the Algorithm That Fed the Children?" It included the full chat history, a timeline of Avery's work, and side-by-side analysis of the leaked data compared to the real code.
It was undeniable.
The story flipped overnight. Independent cybersecurity experts verified the logs. Ethical coders praised her logic. Global aid groups released statements confirming her algorithm's impact. CNN ran a segment titled, "The Teen Who Changed the World," then got punished for it. And then another twist. Emails surfaced from the school board, showing that Kellen's father had been pressuring administrators for weeks to watch the Hale girl closely. He had even hinted to local law enforcement about her suspicious computer activity. The narrative collapsed. Avery's suspension was reversed, but the damage wasn't just to her name, it was to her trust, her safety, her sense of belonging. She returned to school that Monday to a hallway of silence. Not respect, not apologies, just the cold recognition that she had survived something meant to crush her. But survival wasn't her goal. She had one now. As she reached her locker, a manila envelope sat inside, unmarked, except for the words handwritten in red ink. "We know who Switch is. Walk away before it's too late." The world didn't change overnight, but it felt like it had cracked. When Switch's file went public, it moved through the internet like wildfire. No press release, no fancy announcement, just undeniable evidence posted at midnight on a private server. By morning, it was everywhere. Avery Built It trended globally within hours. News anchors adjusted their scripts. Talk shows scrambled to book tech experts. Late-night hosts delivered monologues not about corruption, but about a girl who, under threat and silence, reprogrammed the future. The photos of her coded notebooks, the ones once leaked to paint her as dangerous, now framed her as revolutionary. Memes were born, but so were movements. Students across the country staged walkouts in her name, holding signs that read, "Black Brilliance, May's Threat," and "Avery is all of us." Activists shared their own stories of being erased in classrooms and boardrooms. Engineers at top firms added, "Avery built it" to their bios in solidarity. Even rival programmers who once dismissed her work now called it the most significant independent algorithm deployment of the decade. And then Harvard called.
Not admissions administration.
They didn't offer her a seat. They offered her a stage. They wanted her to speak to the School of Engineering, on record, in front of faculty and students. A girl still in high school, invited to one of the most prestigious academic institutions on Earth to discuss algorithmic ethics, system bias, and humanitarian coding. Her parents didn't know what to say. They'd had gone from dread to disbelief in less than 2 weeks. The same father who'd asked if she should lie low now hovered near her door every night, silently proud. Her mother stopped watching the news, too afraid of breaking down every time Avery's face appeared on screen. But Avery didn't feel victorious. Not really. She sat in her room with the lights off, staring at the manila envelope that still sat unopened on her desk, the one warning her about Switch. The fame was a fire she never asked for. The headlines were louder than her heartbeat, yet all she could think about was the silence before it all began. Back when she was just a girl solving problems in the corner of the room, she turned off her phone, closed her laptop, and wrote a letter by hand. Each word was slow, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she wanted it to land like thunder. It wasn't addressed to a journalist or a lawyer, or even a university. It was addressed to Tower itself, U.S. Department of Education. She began with her name, then her school, then the timeline, how her equations were dismissed, her abilities questioned, her work investigated, before it was understood. She described the whispers, the lowered expectations, the time she was asked in front of class if she even knew what logarithms were, the time her project was marked down because the teacher thought she didn't do it alone, the way counselors always brought up trade school, never Stanford, the way white classmates were called gifted, but she was told to slow down so others could catch up. She didn't beg for justice. She demanded it. She demanded an audit of her school's disciplinary records, showing who was suspended and why. She demanded they review the advanced placement enrollment numbers, broken down by race. She demanded accountability for the educators who looked the other way, and systemic reform so no other black student would have to trade silence for safety. And at the bottom of the letter, she signed it, not as a victim, but as a witness. She didn't tell her parents. She mailed it the next day, alone. And then the real noise began. Because while the media crowned her a genius, Avery refused to play the part they wrote for her. She declined talk show invitations, turned down sponsorship offers, said no to book deals. She didn't want to be famous for surviving what should never have happened. She wanted a reckoning. Still, the eyes didn't leave her. She spoke at Harvard. Not in heels or some pre-approved outfit, but in the same hoodie she had worn while solving the algorithm. Her speech wasn't rehearsed. It was a scar, opened publicly. She talked about how systems weren't broken, they were built this way. She said she didn't want to be the exception. She wanted to be irrelevant someday, because black genius would no longer need proving. When she stepped down, the auditorium didn't applaud. It stood in stunned silence. The applause came later, louder, longer than anything she'd ever heard. And yet, she still returned to her bedroom the same way she always did. Quiet. Alone. The manila envelope still sat on her desk. She had tried to forget about it. But its presence was a pulse. Finally, one night she opened it. Inside was a single USB drive, and a handwritten note. You're being watched, not just by us, but by people you never see coming. On the USB surveillance footage. Grainy, low-resolution clips from outside her school, her home, her bus stop. Dated weeks before she ever made headlines. Time-stamped, organized, methodical. She felt her breath catch. Who was watching her before the world even knew her name? She sent the footage to Switch, encrypted and secured. Hours passed. Finally, a response came. This isn't government surveillance. It's private. A second message followed, and whoever paid for it started the tracking before the algorithm even went live. Just then her phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. They don't want your fame. They want what's in your head. Stop digging. The letter Avery had written to the U.S. Department of Education didn't just make its way to a dusty inbox. It landed like a detonator. Within weeks, the Office for Civil Rights launched an official inquiry into the Elridge Unified School District. What began as a review of one student's suspension became an excavation of a decade-long pattern, numbers that spoke louder than any apology could. The statistics were damning. In the past 10 years, less than 4% of black students in the district had been placed in AP STEM courses. Meanwhile, white students, regardless of GPA, were routinely recommended by default. Disciplinary actions against black and brown students were 5 times higher for similar infractions. Teachers who reported disparities were quietly reassigned or ignored. And perhaps worst of all, student files revealed dozens of qualified applicants whose names had been manually removed from accelerated placement lists. The story broke on national media under the headline, "Erased in Plain Sight." A class action lawsuit was filed within a month, backed by civil rights attorneys, education reform groups, and the families of over 200 students. But the case wasn't just about compensation or headlines. It was about legacy, about acknowledgement. And Avery Hale was asked to testify. She stood inside the courtroom, a place built more for power than truth, with her hair pulled back, her voice steady. The defense lawyers tried to minimize her role, calling her a fringe case, and suggesting that her exceptionalism proves the system works. But when Avery took the stand, the room changed.
They didn't just underestimate me, she said.
Voice rising with a quiet fury. They erased me. They pretended I didn't exist until the world forced them to see me. And now that I've spoken, they're calling me an anomaly instead of what I am. Evident. A hush spread across the courtroom. Judges stopped writing. Even the defense attorney looked down. Her testimony didn't focus on code or fame. It focused on the years of dismissal, the gaslighting, the teachers who praised white students for the same ideas she'd been accused of cheating on. She spoke not as a genius, but as a witness to daily, grinding injustice. And then came the avalanche. More students came forward. A Salvadoran girl who was told math isn't your thing. Try art. A boy whose name was flagged for behavioral issues because he corrected a teacher on a simple equation. A Muslim student placed in remedial science despite scoring in the 99th percentile on standardized tests. The lawsuit became more than a case. It became a movement. Protests filled the streets of Elridge. Students carried signs reading, "We were here all along." Parents demanded resignations. The local superintendent stepped down under pressure. One school board member was found to have written internal emails calling students of color statistical liabilities. The courtroom overflowed each day of the trial. Media vans parked outside. Civil rights icons arrived in support. But through it all, Avery remained distant from the cameras. She refused interviews. She didn't want her story to eclipse the hundreds of others. She had already had her moment. Now it was about them. The final week of the trial was tense. The district's legal team fought to paint the errors as clerical, systemic issues, as miscommunication. But the paper trails, spreadsheets, emails, teacher reports, all told the same truth. They knew, and they did nothing. When the jury was dismissed to deliberate, no one dared breathe. The courtroom felt suspended in time, as if the very air waited for justice to catch up. The verdict came in the following afternoon. Guilty, on all counts. The district had been found liable for racial discrimination, systemic academic suppression, and the unlawful denial of educational equity. The court ordered sweeping reforms, external oversight, annual audits, mandatory equity training, and a multi-million-dollar fund to support affected students and their families. Applause erupted. Some cried. Others stood silently, stunned that a machine as old as racism had finally been cracked open. But even as the gavel fell, a final motion was filed. The Elridge School District, under new legal counsel, submitted an appeal. Their argument? That the data had been interpreted unfairly, and that no single student's experience should dictate statewide policy. They wanted the verdict overturned. The courtroom emptied, but the tension didn't. Avery sat quietly in the hallway, outside the courthouse, staring at the marble floor. Her parents were nearby talking to reporters. Lawyers offered hugs, congratulations, but Avery didn't smile. She had told the truth, and the truth had won. But power never surrendered without a fight. She opened her phone, scrolling past headlines that called her a trailblazer and America's STEM prodigy. She kept looking until she found the article buried under the noise. Elridge to appeal discrimination verdict. Blames misused data. Her hands clenched. Because the appeal wasn't just a legal tactic. It was a threat, a reminder that the system didn't just want to win. It wanted to outlast. And then her phone buzzed. A text from a blocked number. You may have beat the school, but you haven't touched the state. We're still here. That night, Avery received an unmarked envelope in her mailbox. Inside was a copy of her sealed school records, stamped redacted, for internal eyes only. The manila envelope sat on Avery's desk like a scar, unmarked, untraceable, and heavier than anything she'd ever held. Inside it lay something she was never supposed to see. Her own sealed academic records, stamped in red, redacted, for internal eyes only. Page after page sliced deeper than any insult. It wasn't just grades or attendance reports. It was coded cruelty from people who were supposed to believe in her. Handwritten notes from teachers and counselors labeled her with terms like lax focus, disruptive intellect, and too advanced for peer environments. One line stopped her breath cold. Student exhibits intellectually aggressive behavior, unsuitable for long-term academic integration. They hadn't just questioned her intelligence. They had documented her erasure, quietly, strategically, repeatedly. And now, even after she had cracked open their system in court, they were trying to strike back from the shadows, trying to lay the groundwork to dismiss her, not as a victim of racism, but as a difficult anomaly. She could have wept. She could have screamed. But instead she sharpened her pencil. Let them appeal. Let them pretend. She wasn't just ready. She was armed. Because the one thing Avery had always known how to do better than anyone in the room: prove things. She spent the next 5 weeks inside her bedroom, buried in data. Her walls became a quilt of graphs, timelines, and heat maps. Her desk was cluttered with FOIA requests, school board reports, and internal emails she was never meant to have. Some came from public sources, others from an anonymous drop that smelled faintly of switch. What she uncovered was worse than anyone imagined. In Elridge schools, algorithmic flagging software was being used to determine student placement into gifted and advanced STEM programs. But the system was flawed, intentionally or not. It was trained on biased datasets. Students were flagged for instability if they'd moved more than once in 3 years. Students were disqualified from AP track eligibility if they had even a single behavioral referral, no matter how small. Communication red flags were auto-applied to students who didn't speak standard academic English. And what did all those filters have in common? They disproportionately targeted Black and brown students. Avery broke it all down. She ran simulations across a 5-year period and found that nearly 82% of Black students were never even seen by counselors for AP placement, because the system filtered them out before a human could intervene. Meanwhile, white students with lower test scores but academic curiosity comments were pushed forward. She layered the data with actual student testimonies. A Latina student told her she was encouraged to take cosmetology over chemistry, despite earning straight A's in science. A Nigerian student shared that his math teacher once told him, "Numbers aren't everything. You need to be more realistic." Another girl had been suspended for defiance after she corrected a math error on the board. All of it went into Avery's report. 700 pages. Graphs, source references, statistical modeling, comparative state averages, machine learning audits, predictive analytics simulations. It was a weapon of truth, surgical, undeniable, devastating. When the school district's appeal went to hearing, the court was packed. Reporters, families, national civil rights observers, tech ethicists, all present to witness whether the system would again try to protect itself. Avery didn't come with a lawyer. She walked in alone, wearing a black t-shirt that read, "My proof is in the data." The district's legal team came ready to argue bias, emotion, and misinterpretation of trends. They didn't expect what Avery brought. She placed a bound red volume on the table, titled "Systemic Filtering and Racial Disqualification in Elridge STEM Tracks: A Forensic Audit." Turn to page 24. The judges did. That page detailed a heat map of every flagged student in the past 5 years, and where they ended up. The trend was clear. Filtered students never progressed. The AP science track was nearly all white. The robotics club, the computer science electives, the math competition team. Same pattern. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She narrated the numbers with calm fury. "This isn't about one student," she said. "This is what happens when racism gets automated." By the end of her presentation, the courtroom was silent. No one could argue the data. Even the opposing lawyers fumbled, reduced to speculating about oversights in policy and the challenge of predictive models. But it was over. The court ruled in her favor. The appeal was struck down. In a sweeping final order, the court required the district to dismantle its filtering system, issue public apologies, and pay damages to over 400 families affected by academic discrimination. A state-level audit was ordered, and the software vendor behind the algorithm, their contract was terminated. Investigations into their use in other districts began immediately. Avery had won again, but this time, not for herself. She had created a record, a document that would live beyond her, a model other students could point to, other families could use. Justice, measured in pages, not applause. But before she could even catch her breath, another message came. Not from Switch, not from a court, from the National Education Policy Coalition in Washington, D.C. They were launching a countrywide initiative to standardize equity in STEM education, and they wanted Avery to write the core of the curriculum. Not as a figurehead, as a co-architect. They wanted her to redesign how schools define, identify, and nurture brilliance. She hadn't even said yes yet, but her name was already being whispered across Capitol Hill as the girl who rewrote the system. Avery was only 16 when she became the architect of something America had never dared to imagine. A national education model that didn't filter genius through the lens of privilege. After the court's ruling against the Elridge School District sent shockwaves through education circles, her name became a symbol not just of justice, but reform. The National Education Policy Coalition in Washington, D.C., extended an invitation that no teenager had ever received before, to co-lead a task force to redesign how giftedness was identified across all public schools in the United States. She said yes, quietly, without fanfare. But inside she carried the weight of generations who had been overlooked, mislabeled, and discarded because their brilliance didn't look like what white America expected it to. The office was glass-walled, perched on the edge of Capitol Hill. Around her sat policy advisors, with degrees from Yale and Stanford, former education secretaries, nonprofit founders, data scientists, all powerful, all polished, and most of them, white. Avery listened carefully through their meetings, nodding as they spoke in clinical terms, performance indicators, early cognitive markers, differentiated tracking systems, but she knew deeply that they were still missing the point. On the third day, she finally spoke. "You're still defining talent by performance," she said, voice steady but edged with fire. "But performance is a reflection of access. You need to measure potential, not polish." The room fell silent. She pulled up slides from her 700-page audit, overlaying test scores with opportunity maps, then with housing instability rates and racial flagging algorithms. She showed how giftedness had never been absent in Black or brown communities. It had just never been recognized. "Test scores go up when students stop being hunted," she added. From that day forward, the tone changed. Avery proposed a radical new framework, one that would train educators to recognize cultural learning differences, one that weighed community leadership, resilience, and pattern recognition as much as traditional math scores, one that penalized schools for recommending students based on parental pressure or teacher bias. And she made sure one thing was clear: no algorithm would be left untested. She built a parallel system, an open-source bias-audited tool that allowed schools to cross-examine their own tracking data. It didn't sort students. It asked, "Who have you missed?" Over the next 10 months, she collaborated with teachers from underfunded districts, counselors from immigrant communities, and even incarcerated students who had never been considered gifted. She took their stories, their pain, and embedded it into every layer of the curriculum. When the pilot programs launched, the results were immediate. In one Mississippi district, the percentage of Black students in advanced STEM tripled in a single semester. In East Oakland, 4 students once labeled behavioral risks were now leading robotics teams. In Houston, a school that hadn't had a single Latina student in its AP calculus course in 5 years enrolled 6 in one fall. And something deeper shifted. Classrooms that once saw brilliance only in silence and compliance now celebrated creativity, risk, and complexity. Teachers cried during training. One wrote to Avery, "I see them now. I finally see them." Back at Elridge High, once the epicenter of her trauma, educators were being retrained, using the very metrics she designed. A counselor who once marked her as difficult now used Avery's empathy-based assessments to elevate a student whose brilliance came in questions, not answers. She never returned to that building. She didn't need to. Her ideas had made their way in. Still, Avery never got comfortable. She declined television interviews, turned down lucrative offers from educational software firms. She refused to be commodified. This wasn't about fame. It was about repair. And yet, on the morning of the official nationwide rollout of the curriculum, she felt a tension she couldn't name. She stood at the podium during the national launch event in Chicago, her fingers curled tightly around her speech. Dignitaries filled the hall, news crews buzzed, teachers who'd flown in from all over the country waited to hear from the teenager who had rewritten how brilliance was defined. She looked over the crowd and said, "This isn't a gift. This is restitution." Her voice cracked, but didn't break. She ended with a challenge. What would our country look like if it had never erased the minds it feared? The applause was thunderous. After the cameras dimmed, she walked quietly backstage, her shoulders finally dropping. A coordinator approached, handing her a stack of notes and envelopes from students who'd been inspired by her. But one envelope stood out. It was thick, aged and sealed with wax, not a modern signature but something older, ceremonial. There was no name, only a set of coordinates written in tight, looping cursive, and a single line. This vault was left behind by one they chose to forget. But brilliance never dies. It waits. Avery blinked, heart stalling. She recognized the handwriting. It matched a signature she'd seen once, on the corner of an old buried thesis in the archives of an HBCU library she'd visited during her curriculum research. It belonged to Amari Langston, a black mathematician from the 1940s, whose work had been cited without credit in several Ivy League papers, but whose name disappeared after a mysterious scandal, never investigated. She stared at the envelope. Was this real? A forgotten vault? Or another test? That night, Avery opened her laptop and typed the coordinates into a secure map overlay, and what appeared wasn't a school or a museum, but a long-abandoned research facility deep in rural Virginia, marked decommissioned, no public access. The coordinates led Avery to a place time had tried to bury. Hidden deep in rural Virginia, past collapsed barns and rusted fences, stood a weather-worn structure overgrown with ivy and silent. It was labeled on official records as a decommissioned climate research station, but even those records were hard to find. What stood before her was no ordinary building. The keypad still worked. She entered the code found etched into the envelope's wax seal. With a mechanical groan, the vault opened. Dust swirled in rays of sunlight, breaking through cracked windows. Inside, rows of filing cabinets leaned like weary soldiers. The air smelled of old paper and a kind of neglect that bordered on sacred. A single bulb flickered overhead. In the far corner beneath a canvas drape, she found it. A mahogany desk, stacked with leather-bound notebooks. Each cover bore the initials M. She opened one slowly. The handwriting inside was delicate but deliberate. Mathematical symbols flowed across the pages like music, fluent, unbroken, untouched by doubt. But these weren't classroom formulas. These were advanced theoretical concepts, the kind that hadn't appeared in public journals until the early 2000s. Yet these were dated. As she turned the pages, one name surfaced again and again in footnotes. Margot Elise Carter. Avery paused. She'd never heard of her. That name didn't appear in NASA's published records, not in the history books, not in any database of 20th century scientific contributors. But her math was revolutionary, the kind of brilliance that changed fields, and it had been hidden. Page after page revealed models for orbital velocity correction, algorithms for trajectory simulations, even early forms of machine learning prediction. Yet every notebook ended the same way, with a jagged line across the final page, cut off, incomplete. Something had stopped her. Avery felt the ache in her chest. This wasn't just research, it was a life's work, interrupted. She dove deeper, pulling boxes from the surrounding shelves. There were letters written in code, correspondence between Carter and a mentor at an unnamed agency. One memo read, "Her work threatens the hierarchy. Do not advance her findings without oversight." Another, "We've absorbed what we need. The rest is to be archived indefinitely." They hadn't just ignored her. They erased her. For 2 days Avery remained in the vault. She slept on the floor, documenting every page, cross-referencing Carter's theorems with current models. Her heart raced as she realized Carter hadn't just been ahead of her time. She may have predicted a model for quantum gravity decades before the mainstream even had language for it. But one equation remained unfinished. It spanned 7 pages. Symbols danced between physics and mathematics. It hinted at unification, a theory connecting quantum mechanics and general relativity. The holy grail of modern physics. Avery stared at it until her eyes blurred. And then something inside her clicked. A pattern. Not one she was taught, one she felt. It wasn't just math. It was Margot Carter's voice, speaking through symbols, buried in margins, echoed in loops that defied Euclidean space. Tears welled in Avery's eyes, because this wasn't about recognition. It was about restoration. She sharpened her pencil. Her hand trembled as she brought the point down onto the page. She had already begun to solve it, and the numbers were starting to sing. They buried her genius. They feared her truth. But Avery turned silence into legacy, and numbers into justice. If you believe brilliance should never be erased, type yes. If you believe in justice.